What happens when you take your last breath? Is it truly the end, the final exhalation that marks the end of all things? Or is it a gateway to something much greater, something beyond our understanding? What if the last breath isn't the end at all, but a transition, a crossing into an entirely different dimension of existence, beyond the physical world we know? In this exploration, we will venture into the unknown, peeling back the layers of ancient wisdom and modern science to uncover what might actually unfold in the moment of death. Together, we will uncover the mysteries of the afterlife, death's symbolism, and the profound journey that begins when the breath fades. Are you ready to cross the threshold? Then let us begin. Imagine standing on the edge of a vast ocean. You've sailed across it your entire life, navigating through storms, calm seas, and moments of clarity. But now, as you approach the shore, you realize that this is the final destination. The wind begins to shift, the air grows thick, and you take your last breath. What happens next? For most of human history, death has been viewed as an abyss, a place where the known world ends, and everything dissolves into the unknown. In many cultures, death is a symbol of ultimate finality, the end of a journey. Yet, this view is not universal. Some believe that death is merely a passage, a crossing into another realm where the soul continues its journey. One such tradition that speaks profoundly on the matter is Tibetan Buddhism, where the death process is seen as a multi-stage journey, an unfolding of consciousness that has the potential to transcend life itself. Known as the Bardo Thodol, or the Tibetan Book of the Dead, this ancient text describes in exquisite detail the stages that the soul passes through after death. In these teachings, the last breath is not the end. It is the beginning of a profound spiritual journey. But the Bardo Thodol is not alone in offering insights into what happens after the last breath. Across the world, many traditions describe similar transitions. The ancient Egyptians, with their myth of the journey of the soul through the underworld, the Christian concept of judgment and ascension or descent, the Greek belief in the soul's journey to Hades. However, modern science has also begun to approach this enigma, albeit through a different lens. What does the brain experience in its final moments? What does consciousness go through when it is no longer tethered to the body? While science may not offer answers as definitive as ancient texts, it does provide a fascinating and complex picture of the brain's last moments. So, what really happens when you take your last breath? Let us begin our journey into the moment of transition, the moment of death itself. The last breath is a moment both ordinary and extraordinary. In one sense, it is just a biological function, a moment when the lungs, deprived of oxygen, cease to draw air, and the heart, having slowed down over the course of time, stops beating. The physical body, now devoid of its lifeblood, begins its natural process of decay. But what happens in that instant? Is the soul truly separate from the body? Does it leave, or does it linger? According to the Bardo Thodol, the moment of death is known as the Chikai Bardo, the Bardo of the clear light. The soul, now free from the limitations of the physical body, enters into a state of pure consciousness, where the clear light of reality reveals itself in its ultimate form. This light is not something we can see with our eyes, but something we experience directly. It is the radiant manifestation of the true nature of the mind, a glimpse into the vast, unconditioned space that lies beyond the confines of ordinary perception. This moment of death is described as one of supreme potential. For the prepared soul, it is an opportunity for liberation, a chance to break free from the cycle of rebirth, to dissolve all attachments, and to merge with the Absolute. But for the unprepared mind, the clear light can be terrifying. Most of us, caught up in our identities, attachments, and fears, do not recognize it for what it is. Instead, we recoil in fear and confusion, and in doing so, we miss the chance for liberation. What happens in the brain during this transition? Scientifically, the moments surrounding death are a subject of intense study. Researchers have observed that, in the minutes before and after death, the brain exhibits unusual electrical activity, particularly in the form of brain waves that appear to be similar to the patterns observed during deep meditative states. This has led some scientists to speculate that the mind may experience a final surge of awareness, a moment of clarity before the dissolution of consciousness. In fact, near-death experiences reported by those who have been revived often describe a feeling of peace, a journey toward a brilliant light, and a sense of connection to something greater. Could these phenomena be evidence of the mind's journey into a realm of pure consciousness, the very clear light described in Tibetan teachings? This is where the mysteries of life and death intersect. The moment of death, when the body ceases to function and the mind is released, is not a single, simple moment. It is an unfolding of consciousness that may last longer than we imagine. Once the last breath is taken, the Chikai Bardo dissolves into what Tibetan Buddhists call the Chonyid Bardo, the Bardo of visions. In this stage, the soul enters a state where it is no longer confined by the body's limitations. Without the physical senses to filter reality, the soul experiences a world of visions, visions that are intensely personal, reflecting the deepest recesses of the soul's psyche. According to the Bardo Thodol, these visions are not external entities, but projections of the mind itself. In the peaceful stages, the soul might encounter peaceful deities, figures of light, love, and compassion, while in the wrathful stages, the soul might encounter frightening, monstrous deities that represent unresolved fears and attachments. These visions are shaped by the soul's karma, the accumulated weight of actions, desires, and thoughts from past lives. If the soul is filled with fear, it may encounter terrifying visions. If it is at peace, it may experience visions of serenity and joy. The soul's task is to recognize these visions as mere projections of its own mind and to see through them, thus achieving liberation. But how does this align with the experiences of those who have had near-death experiences or reports of the afterlife from different cultures? In many NDEs, people describe seeing loved ones or encountering divine beings that guide them toward the light. Could these be the peaceful deities described in the Bardo Thodol? Could the realm of the afterlife be shaped by our own consciousness, as these teachings suggest? The idea that the afterlife is a projection of the mind is a radical one, yet it offers an intriguing perspective. If the mind is truly the creator of its own reality, then perhaps death is not a descent into nothingness, but an opportunity for the soul to face itself in its most pure, unadulterated form. When the soul has journeyed through the Chikai Bardo and the Chonyid Bardo, the realms of dissolution and visions, it reaches a crucial moment in the process of death. The soul, now far from its physical body, faces the inevitable truth. It must choose a path forward. If it has not achieved liberation or recognized the clear light, if it remains ensnared by fear, attachments, or unresolved karmic debts, it will find itself drawn into the Sidpa Bardo, the final phase of the Bardo, where the cycle of life and death beckons once more. This is the moment where the soul faces one of the most profound and mysterious decisions, its next incarnation. The soul, still tethered to its desires, emotions, and the karmic weight of its past actions, enters into a state where it is drawn toward the prospect of rebirth. However, this is not a conscious choice. The mind, clouded by past tendencies and desires, is not in a position to make a deliberate decision. Instead, it is driven by forces that are far beyond its awareness, forces of karma, deeply rooted in past actions, thoughts, and emotions. In the Sidpa Bardo, the soul encounters visions that are uniquely tailored to its karmic makeup. The soul might see images of couples in union, representing the creation of new life, the potential for new birth. These images are not simply metaphors. They are the spiritual representations of the soul's deepest inclinations, the unresolved desires, and the bonds formed in past lives. The soul, in its confusion and attachment, is drawn to these visions, which act as a powerful force that guides it toward a new incarnation, often without any clear understanding of why or how. The choice of the next body is not a rational, deliberative decision. It is one that arises from a place of deep, subconscious attraction. It is shaped by the soul's desires, fears, and unhealed wounds. This is where the concept of samsara, the endless cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, becomes most apparent. The soul, like a wheel trapped in perpetual motion, is bound to repeat its journey through life, driven by the same emotional and karmic forces that have followed it from life to life. These karmic forces are not simply random. They are the direct result of the choices the soul has made in previous lifetimes. Every action, every thought, every intention creates an imprint, a mark on the soul's consciousness. Some of these marks are light, born of kindness and compassion, while others are heavy, born of anger, attachment, or ignorance. These karmic imprints create a magnetic pull, drawing the soul towards circumstances, families, and situations that resonate with its past actions. For example, if the soul has been consumed by anger or hatred in past lives, it might be drawn to a situation where those emotions are played out once again. The soul might find itself born into a family or a situation that brings out those same negative tendencies, forcing it to confront the unresolved emotions of its past. Similarly, if the soul has cultivated great love and compassion, it may find itself in circumstances that will allow it to continue its journey of growth, learning, and transcendence. However, for the unawakened soul, one that is still enmeshed in its desires and attachments, this process of reincarnation feels entirely automatic. The soul doesn't recognize that it is being guided by unconscious patterns. It simply follows the pull of its karmic conditioning, unaware that it is being reborn into yet another cycle of suffering. This is the great tragedy of samsara, that the soul, bound by its attachments and unhealed desires, keeps returning to the material world, caught in the same patterns of ignorance, suffering, and desire. One of the key teachings of Tibetan Buddhism, and indeed many spiritual traditions, is that the self is an illusion. The Siddha Bardo offers a powerful insight into the nature of the self, revealing that the soul's desire for rebirth arises not from a true, unchanging self, but from a mistaken identification with the ego, an identity that is constructed from the material world and its attachments. In life, we form identities around the roles we play, the things we possess, the relationships we form. But when the soul faces the prospect of rebirth, it is revealed that these identities are fleeting, impermanent, and ultimately empty. The desire for rebirth arises from the ego's mistaken belief that it is a permanent, unchanging entity. This is why the Bardo Thodol emphasizes the importance of recognizing the illusory nature of the self before death, as well as in the afterlife. The soul must understand that the self is not a fixed, unchanging entity. Rather, it is a fluid, ever-shifting process, a collection of experiences, thoughts, and emotions that change with time. When the soul can recognize this truth, when it realizes that its desire for rebirth is merely an attachment to a false identity, it is finally able to transcend the cycle of samsara. In the final moments of the Siddha Bardo, the soul has an opportunity to break free from the cycle of reincarnation and merge once again with the clear light of consciousness, the unconditioned, boundless source of all existence. This is the final test, the ultimate opportunity for liberation. The potential for liberation in the Siddha Bardo is perhaps the most important aspect of the entire Bardo experience. While most souls, caught in their attachments, will continue on the path of rebirth, there is always the possibility for awakening. If the soul can recognize the illusory nature of its desire for rebirth, if it can detach itself from the pull of karma and the cycle of suffering, it can merge once more with the clear light of pure consciousness. This recognition is not an intellectual understanding, but a direct, experiential realization. The soul must come to the profound understanding that the entire cycle of samsara, life, death, and rebirth, is a dream, an illusion of the mind. It is not a real, solid, or permanent reality, but a play of consciousness that arises and dissolves moment by moment. By recognizing this truth, the soul can let go of its attachments, its desires, and its fear of death, allowing it to dissolve back into the vastness of the clear light. But this process is not easy. For most souls, the pull of desire, fear, and karma is too strong to overcome. The illusion of the self, the sense of being a separate individual entity, creates an almost irresistible force that drives the soul back into the cycle of rebirth. Yet for those who are able to see through this illusion, the potential for liberation is immense. The soul can break free from the wheel of samsara and merge with the infinite, realizing its true nature as an expression of the unconditioned, boundless consciousness that underlies all of existence. The Siddha Bardo is not just a theoretical concept, it is a practical teaching. For those of us still living, it offers profound insights into how we might prepare for our own transition when the time comes. The teachings of the Bardo Thodol emphasize the importance of spiritual practice, mindfulness, and self-awareness in life. By cultivating awareness of the impermanence of the self and the illusory nature of our attachments, we can begin to free ourselves from the karmic patterns that will shape our future lives. Meditation, prayer, and contemplation of death are all practices that help the mind recognize the fleeting nature of the ego. The more we can detach from our desires and attachments in life, the more likely we are to recognize the truth when we pass from this world. The Siddha Bardo is a reminder that our actions, thoughts, and intentions in this life shape not only our present reality, but our future rebirths. It encourages us to live with awareness, compassion, and wisdom, so that when the moment comes, we are ready to face death, not with fear, but with openness and clarity. When we approach the question of what truly happens during death from a scientific perspective, we are met with a puzzle. Despite the tremendous advances in neuroscience and medical research, death remains one of the most enigmatic experiences in human existence. While much is understood about the physical process of dying, the cessation of the heart, the shutdown of bodily systems, the question of consciousness, and what happens to the mind during this transition remains elusive. At the moment of death, as the body's vital functions cease, a cascade of changes begins in the brain. When the heart stops pumping blood, the brain is deprived of oxygen, and this lack of oxygen is the beginning of a process that ultimately leads to the brain's shutdown. Neurons, the building blocks of thought, begin to die. And with this, the conscious mind appears to lose its grasp on the world. And yet, recent studies have raised questions about the role of consciousness in these final moments, suggesting that the brain's activity may not cease as quickly as once believed. One of the most intriguing areas of research in this regard is the study of near-death experiences, those vivid, often transformative experiences reported by individuals who have been close to death, only to be revived. Common elements of NDEs include a sensation of leaving the body, traveling through a tunnel, encountering deceased loved ones, and experiencing a profound sense of peace or unity with the universe. These experiences are often described with such clarity and emotional significance that they cannot be easily dismissed as mere hallucinations or tricks of the brain. Researchers have found that in some cases, there is a marked increase in brain activity after the heart stops. This has led to the fascinating possibility that the brain might remain active for a brief period after clinical death, potentially explaining the vivid experiences many people report during their NDEs. Brain scans taken in the moments after cardiac arrest have shown that certain regions of the brain, particularly those involved in memory and emotional processing, may experience a burst of activity. This spike in activity suggests that the brain is not simply shutting down, but may in fact be going through a final surge of heightened awareness, perhaps providing a brief moment of clarity or an intense sensory experience. This surge of brain activity has led some researchers to speculate that these final moments of heightened awareness could explain the common features of NDEs. The flashes of light, encounters with deceased loved ones, and the overwhelming sense of peace that many people report could be the brain's final attempt to make sense of the transition from life to death. In a sense, the mind may be processing all that it has experienced in life, offering one last vivid mental image or experience before it fades completely. However, this explanation, while compelling, is not without its critics. Some neuroscientists argue that these NDEs are merely the result of physiological processes occurring in the dying brain. The brain, they suggest, is starved of oxygen in its final moments, and this oxygen deprivation could trigger hallucinations or altered states of consciousness. The sudden surge of brain activity, in this view, is simply a product of the brain's desperate attempt to hold on to consciousness before it fully shuts down. According to this theory, NDEs are not evidence of an afterlife or the persistence of consciousness beyond death, but rather a byproduct of the brain's complex and still poorly understood response to the dying process. On the other hand, there are those who argue that the brain's activity during death could point to something much more profound: the possibility that consciousness is not solely a product of brain function, but something more fundamental, a force that exists independently of the physical body. This theory, often referred to as non-local consciousness, posits that consciousness is not confined to the brain, but rather exists as a part of the fabric of the universe itself. From this perspective, the heightened brain activity during NDEs could be seen not as the last flickers of a dying brain, but as evidence that consciousness persists beyond the physical body, perhaps even after death. This theory is supported by some quantum physicists who suggest that consciousness may be a fundamental component of reality, just as energy and matter are. If consciousness exists on a non-local level, it might transcend the physical limitations of the brain, offering the possibility that when the body dies, the consciousness does not simply vanish, but continues to exist in some form, possibly merging with a greater universal consciousness. Yet, this remains speculative territory. There is still no conclusive evidence to prove that consciousness survives death in any form, and many questions remain unanswered. While NDEs offer tantalizing glimpses into the possibility of life after death, they also leave us with more questions than answers. How can we reconcile the mind's vivid experiences during death with the scientific understanding of the brain's function? Is it possible that consciousness exists independently of the physical body, or is it simply an emergent property of neural activity? The study of what happens to consciousness at the time of death remains one of the greatest mysteries in both science and philosophy. Until we can fully understand the nature of consciousness and its relationship to the body, the question of what truly happens when we take our last breath may remain elusive. But as science continues to investigate the complexities of the brain, and as our understanding of consciousness evolves, we may one day uncover answers to this most profound of questions. Answers that could change not only how we view death, but how we understand life itself. In the end, what really happens when we take our last breath remains one of the greatest mysteries of human existence. Is it the end of everything, or the beginning of something far greater than we can imagine? Whether we find ourselves in the peaceful light of liberation, confronted by visions of our own mind, or reincarnated in another life, death holds an undeniable truth. It is the ultimate transition, the final doorway into the unknown. So the next time you take a breath, whether it is the first or the last, remember, this life is a journey, and death is just another step along the way. If this journey into the mysteries of life, death, and what comes after resonated with you, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's continue exploring the greatest questions of existence together.